Okay, Marina, everyone's been asking this question. They've been wondering.
You always do that. You always come up with the question.
Well, whilst you think of your answer, I'll say this. So the reason why we're finally answering this question
because we're retiring.
Is that recently we had an after hours episode conversation, casual thing. And in it, I was being critical of young aspiring architects being influencers and trying to be architect influencers by video recording themselves and, doing these little clips and here and there and whatever else. Right. And then also I was talking with a contractor recently who's starting their own podcast, and he is a practicing an owner's representative. And he had a bunch of questions, about me, about the show and how we do it and stuff like that.
This is a question about you.
About me, yeah. Tell me about your life. This is in the evening on a weekend because we're so busy that we can't find time. So this is the dedication that we have for the show. This is like a Saturday night. So, expect some mumblings and some ums and ahs. Yeah, so that's why I was like, okay, well, finally, maybe we'll have an episode and we'll answer these questions. So that was about a minute worth of vamping. So now you've had a minute to think about your answer. So lay it on us.
So the key to find the balance, the work-life balance between the office, the podcast, and life is to have David take care of the podcast and just show up when it's time to record.
Yeah. So
that is my answer.
That is your answer. So historically, I've been the one to do all of the heavy lifting. So in the early days, I did all of the planning, the graphics, the editing. I was the tech nerd who figured out all of the technical stuff over time because the show's evolved from a lanyard mic, which lasted about an hour. And then I was like, nope, this is not good enough. We'll buy real mics.
We still have them. If there is fans that want to buy it for $1 million, we can.
For $1 million. Yeah, autograph to be worth less than we bought it for. So yeah, I've historically been the one to do all of the heavy lifting. Now we do have a producer editor who's fantastic, and she's listening to the show because she's going to edit this one. And so I think for you that is the hack, but it's a good hack. I mean, it's a good shortcut or whatever, because I've always said when people ask, students ask me generally how to become successful in whatever way, I'm like, find people who are good at things. Find a sugar daddy. Find a sugar daddy. And but find people who are good at things that you're not good at, and find people who will have a similar mission statement, right? And headed in the same direction, but they like other things or are good at other things that you're not good at. And that's definitely true. That's the foundation of any good team. And these days, architecture, everything's so complicated. It requires multiple people, ideally, to tackle it.
So I'm very interested. What am I good at?
Huh?
What am I good at?
In the podcast? Are you asking the question for real?
I mean, yeah.
I think in the realm of the show, and this extends beyond the show, you bring. I mean, this is not the nature. This is not the conversation we're supposed to have.
I'm sorry. I was
but
trying
I'll
to
answer it. So
throw flowers to myself.
This would be a question for the listeners. So listeners, let me know if you agree with what I'm about to say. What you bring to the table is different perspective for sure, different flavor and way of speaking, but just you offset me. Because I tend to ramble, I tend to go on. I also tend to like to talk about more serious things in a serious matter. And you bring levity to the show, I think.
I could see that.
And I think you ask also really good questions and different questions than I would ever think of. So yeah, there's a good dynamic, I think. I mean, and in fact, when I talk to people who are interested in podcasting, as I've done many times over the years, sometimes it's an owner's rep, it's a contractor, or someone wanted to do a tennis podcast, like whatever. And most people remark, if they're telling the truth, hopefully, that they like the dynamic nature, that they were different.
I think I don't really listen to podcasts, I have to confess. But I could see how if you have 3 people, meaning like you have a guest and you have like 2 hosts, it's more interesting than if you maybe just have one-on-one and you just ping pong between the 2. And then if you only have one person, you have no guests, it's just the host. If you're just a one man or woman show, you have to be super captivating to keep people interesting for like however long your podcast is, right? So I feel like it's easier to do a podcast if you have conversations with someone else than if you're just one person just going about.
Unless you're like Bill Burr.
Unless you're
a
like
comedian
or
someone entertaining.
Or you have the most amazing voice and people could just listen to you, reading a recipe, for 5 hours. You know what I mean? Like,
take the butter out. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. I don't know why I did that voice. That was an interesting voice. Spread the butter. So yeah, but obviously, we've known each other for a long time, and that's the reason why we have the kind of dynamic and rapport that we do. The one comment we've gotten consistently is they wish that I did less talking and then I would allow you more space to speak, which is true and valid. The devil on my shoulder says, well, it's not my responsibility to let people talk. You'll talk if you want to talk. That's I would say.
Well, it's also hard to interrupt you when you're going, so I have to say that. But I'm also.
But it's a vicious cycle. Go ahead. Can you finish your thought?
For example. No, I mean, I think you have a tendency to go on a lot more than I would in general, and that's not just a podcast. It's just like life in general. Like you, even in your emails. Like you go on for way longer than I would. I'll just go to the point and that's it. You have to like spread the butter all over every corner and edges of the toast, which I do, by the way, when I make a toast and I put butter on or Nutella or anything.
It's excessive. Like, you need to calm down with the ratio of butter and Nutella on toast. It's too much.
What are you talking about?
This is like a total tangent. But when you're preparing a piece of toast, here's a nice. How big is a piece of toast? Like 5 by 5 square piece of toast, toasted to perfection. And here's our little butter container, stick of butter. Now, a normal person would take the butter knife and slice off maybe like 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch.
First of all,
you lop off like half an inch. It's too aggressive.
You don't slice the butter. You like kind of like scoop it at the top with the butter knife.
That's your scooping is too aggressive.
Because it's always
start
hard.
with a nice clean block of butter, and you use it for one piece of toast, and now it looks like it's like there's a divot. You can actually see on the elevation there's like a...
Butter is what runs in my veins.
Yeah.
I cannot
It's the same thing with cheese. It's an aggressive amount of cheese. I can't be stingy with that. Anyway, so it's true what you said. I also think that...
And I would say you're the main host of the show, and I'm, kind of like the... second host, like the side host of the shows, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Like I'm not interested in leading on the thing.
It is true.
Like I'm very comfortable with that position in this instance. Like
sure.
I have no problem with it. Like if I'm 20% of the show and you're 80% of it, like totally fine by me.
Well, it kind of makes sense also because being fully transparent, you are less interested in the podcast than I am. It's not that you're not interested, but you are less interested in it than I am.
Yeah, I mean, the idea came from you and you dragged me into it.
It's true.
Over many, many, many years. And you keep trying to drag me into it by offering me like Prosecco and like snacks.
We could talk about architecture school. I would love to talk about architecture school.
Okay, you gotta stop with that. I graduated so many years ago. I walked away. I finished. I don't need to talk about it anymore. Not my problem. Other people's problem. Okay.
So there is that. That's partly the reason why there is that dynamic or disproportionate amount of talking. It also tends to be that on my side, I still have, and now we're just talking about the show, not less how we balance work.
Yeah, we should probably get back to that.
But it also tends to be on my side. I still have that fear, which I know I should not have, of silence in the show, right? And I shouldn't have that fear because it's perfectly normal to have silence in conversation when someone's thinking.
You mean when it's the two of us?
With anything, I still feel the subconscious need to fill the space with words. I don't know why I have that.
But when it's just the two of us, it doesn't matter. Things get edited. Who's gonna know if there's a 2-hour silence gap between things?
There is very light editing that takes place, but my point is that part of the reason, now I'm self-justifying myself, part of the reason why I keep talking is that when I finish a thought, if I sense that you're not going to jump in with something, I'll just keep going. And then the result is I end up talking for like way too long. So that is me saying it's not my fucking fault that I go on forever. Wow. But these are the nuances of hosting a podcast with a guest or with just the two of us that I have become much more aware of. So the other benefit I have...
It's interesting because when it's just the two of us, I'm not worried about silence. When we have a guest on, I'm worried you're going to run out of things to say or you're not going to react. So I'm constantly thinking, okay, do I have a backup thing? If David has nothing, I got to come up with something. Yeah. You know, so I'm not the main host, but I'm kind of like, I'm the life jacket man, you know?
Right.
Like I gotta throw that life jacket at the guest as soon as I see David.
But you have to have the life jacket.
But I have to make the life jacket, and I need a little bit of time to make it. You know what I mean?
But there have definitely been times.
Sometimes
sometimes
I tune out too. You
know? Yeah, let's just call this the behind the scenes episode. There are definitely some times where we have guests on where I have a mental, gap or something happens and I just don't know what to say in response. Or, to be honest, I don't find what they're saying interesting, so I don't know what to say. Then I look at you for the life jacket, and you stare at me and you shake your head, and I'm like, oh no. Then it's followed by me mumbling for about 20 seconds before I get to my point.
It's hard because and now we're just talking about guest interview, but sometimes when we have guests who are so smart and they're saying things that are so interesting, my brain, I'm gonna sound dumb, but my brain works so hard, and concentrate on what they're saying and think about what they're saying that I don't have time to use my brain to think about a question because I'm so immersed in what they're saying. So actually, we shouldn't invite people who are too smart because it's harder, right?
I think that's true. I think that's also where.
And then I panic because I'm like, oh, I have no life jacket. I don't even remember how to make a life jacket. Right. And then I look at you and I'm like, oh, he doesn't have a life jacket either. And I'm like, no. So then I just throw a wrench in the conversation, something random, just kind of like, a made-up jacket, like here's a branch, like, grab it, hopefully you float.
Right. That definitely happens. And I think that's for the interviews. I sometimes feel like our listeners get more out of the interviews than we do, because during the interview, so much brain power is going toward thinking about how this is going to turn out, what next to ask to get the conversation to get to the next point. Can we afford time to stay on the current subject? Should we throw in a random question? Should we? And there is also danger because if you allow yourself to get into that headspace too much, you become frozen. It's tricky.
Yeah, you're too detached from the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. And I think there's other people who are natural. Like we have some friends who are natural conversationalists, like very good at conversations, very engaging. They ask great questions, and they would do a really good job naturally hosting a podcast. But I guess for me, a little bit less so. It doesn't quite come as naturally, but. So sometimes I think that our listeners actually get more out of the interviews because they obviously have the benefit of not having to think about, what to perform or to ask a question or whatever.
I have to say, there's too much air when you talk, but not in like breathing. There's just too much
hiccups.
Yeah, too many things that want to come out when you talk, like all the time. It never happens to me. I don't understand what is wrong with you. It
happens often during client meetings. I'm like, so the site plan. It's remarkable what we come up with.
Go on Zoom on minis and so, David doing around.
It's proof of authenticity.
like one day she's gonna fly away. There's too much air in his body.
So let's talk about permitting for a second. I know it always comes up. Maybe it's a nervous thing. I don't know. I don't think it is, but it always comes up. It seems to be when we're talking about something critical, like the budget. Like so. Let's talk about this ROM that we have. It's a little bit over budget.
And sometimes I'm like, people are going to think you're going to be sick. Like, what are you doing?
Oh, it's quite possible. So,
behind the scene, trying to go back to the original question, which was the work-life balance. We're still trying to figure it out. That's the answer. You know, like we kind of have a routine, let's say.
Yeah.
You know, like we usually do recordings at a certain time of the week. We used to do them on the weekend, and then we had no weekends, right? So we kind of like offsetted that to try and at least do the interviews during the week. So we usually do these on Friday morning, which kind of also helps just creating a regular rhythm, which is kind of key to anyone who's trying to have a podcast or even anything.
Yes.
You know, I mean, workout, like, you know, walking, doing whatever. You kind of have to like set a schedule.
No, going for a walk. I understand what you said. Yeah. Walking. It's left, right, right. No, left, right. Yeah, I understand.
You know, sometimes I take the stairs down
and you
and I freeze in the middle of it. I'm like, well, what leg was going first?
Okay,
No,
great.
sometimes it does. If you look at this, try go down the stairs, look at the steps as you go down. It confuses your brain. Seriously.
This is you overthinking things again. This is the same thing as you staring into the corner of a room thinking about the definition of bread.
It wasn't a corner, it was a mirror. I was staring at myself in my mirror.
Okay.
No, but I would say schedule. Like trying to have like a kind of a regular pattern is kind of key. And if you have your own business and you're trying to to start a podcast, allocating a specific time to do it. First of all, to make sure that you're going to do it, and also to make sure that doesn't impact everything else you have going on with the office.
You gotta
you have to create boundaries between things.
You gotta create boundaries. You have to partition, right? You have to severance yourself, you know, according to the schedule you've created.
And I feel like it's hard. It's easier to do that when you're two people, because one of you is gonna be like, okay, we gotta record. Like you don't have a choice. Like this is it. If you're by yourself, you have the option to be like, I don't feel like doing it today. Let's do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and something else comes up.
This is just, being organized and being an adult. And it's the same question of how do you find motivation to go to the gym? You just, you figure it out, you do it. You set an alarm clock and you do it. But, for us, so we do have a full architecture and interior design office, and we have the podcast. Now, the benefit that we had was that the podcast started before the office, in fact. So what that allowed is for us to have the podcast kind of up and running and have its sea legs under it before the office came around, so that the podcast took less time. And that's often what I say, and it is true to a degree. However, the podcast has also at the time had evolved greatly and became much more complicated with the introduction of video and then social media presence and reels and quotes and all this other stuff, and then the studio that we made, such that I don't actually know.
I think it was easier though, because you were committed to it.
We were committed already. That's true.
Before,
we felt like we were
I
committed.
could not imagine today, having our own office, like trying to start a podcast.
No, because it would feel
because there is no
superfluous.
time.
Yeah.
And it would feel like, I'm just playing around with something that I shouldn't be spending time on because I have other bigger things to do.
100% bigger things, and anyone who has an architecture office, that there's just like fires all the time you're putting out, and it's just the nature of things and construction. That is true. And I think also too, a lot of times people start a podcast, and by the way, from the time that we started the show until now, the number of architecture podcasts, I would say, has increased 10 or 20-fold. Literally, it's crazy the number of podcasts out there. But when people start a podcast, there's always, of course, the goal of gaining a large number of followers and having success and then fame and then all that kind of stuff, right? Even if people say, I'm just doing it for fun, there's always a small part of most folks are like, but it'd be nice, right? What if this thing took off and became viral or whatever else? And of course, anyone who's dabbled in social media knows that the mentality you have to have for a podcast or for social media is not let that expectation be too much in the forefront, because the chances of it happening are 0.000000001% that it's going to take off and become something.
Yeah, I think also like when we started, there is a bit more wiggle room to figure out like what it was that we wanted to do with the podcast, versus I could imagine that if you have an office and you're starting a podcast, there is a lot more pressure let's say, to make it into something meaningful. You know, we kind of started
because
like,
it has to represent the office,
you know,
or whatever.
it has to like align. You have to think about what content is, and we kind of like started super loose and more as a side, you know, a side fun project, and evolved over time. And we had the time and the room to and the freedom of thinking that way, right? I don't think if we were to start a podcast today with The Office that we would think about it the same way.
If you have an office and you're doing a podcast, again, it's the same thing as having a lot of followers. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking, this could be a way to get clients or get this and that and whatever. And then if you let that thought into your mind, then now you're letting that shape the content. And it becomes a whole different thing, right? Because now you're thinking about like, okay, well, what can we do that's going to appeal to clients and not offend people and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Which is absolutely not how we think about how we create our content.
And so it has been a very different journey for us in that way. That's also why the podcast now is titled The Second Studio, because the idea is that it's not the studio, it's not our architecture studio, it's a second studio that's annexed and adjacent to, it's the B side to our office. And so it allows us to talk about things that are office related, yes. It also allows us to talk directly to the general public, yes. But it also enables us to have fun conversations because it's not officially it's not the Fame Architecture and Design podcast. It's the second studio that's next to it. And I like that relationship, and we set that up very intentionally, or we transitioned, I should say, very intentionally at some point to that kind of conceptual approach.
Which is interesting because I feel like that's exactly the opposite of what any probably PR company would tell you to do, or like business company would tell you to do, right? You should be on brand. You should think exactly about like, who's your audience, what content you should produce, and like work toward like, ROIs of listenership and all of that good stuff. And then you're just producing like what people want. And maybe it works, but I think that's absolutely not how we are looking at it.
No, it's not.
And that also maybe what makes us different from the other architecture podcasts is that we're not thinking about it in the more.
It's possible. I'll say this: like the podcasts I've listened to that are hosted by an office. I'm not talking about architecture offices specifically either, or they're hosted by a business. It's just it's too. You can sense that it's hosted by this corporation.
It's too fabricated.
And they're doing it because that's the thing to do. And it's like not very interesting, I for me at least. I'm like, well, yeah, but this is stale information that we could find online. So why do I care? Why would I listen to you?
But it's also because the people who are speaking aren't speaking themselves. They're
speaking as a representative of the office, right?
I know.
Exactly. So I don't know. Maybe
and I think people are more. I mean, I would imagine that listeners are, at least these days, more interested in like raw human, personal voices than things that are impersonal.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, if you look at even like public TV, like people love reality TV, right? Like things that are a bit more fabricated might not make it the same way.
The other thing for us, or for me specifically, since I've roped you into this, is I enjoy this. I think it's interesting. I find it an interesting exercise. And if I'm being kind of, self-analytical about it, it stems probably back to like when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I loved like performing and being on stage and doing stuff like that. I for whatever reason, I liked it.
Me too. I almost was an actress, and I turned down.
You turned down a gig?
I turned down a big gig.
Ron Howard was like, talented.
Like, no, you're not good enough for me. So I'm joking.
And so I actually do enjoy this as a thing unto itself, and I find it interesting. I find it entertaining for myself. I find it challenging, and quite arrogantly, I've also thought like, well, I probably have something interesting to say that I'd love to share. And so there is a chunk of the show and the reason for its existence that is purely that. Has nothing to do with I have an office and everyone has a podcast, so I will have architecture podcasts and I will talk about construction. Like that's part of it, but that's one tiny part of it.
It's funny because outside of the recording time that I'm here, I never think about really the podcast or what I said and what's out there. And I never really think about...
I know you don't, because your job is to roll in and say weird shit and then bounce.
It's the best job,
I know
it?
It's the best job, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I don't really think about it at all, actually.
Well, so it's also different for you because one of the benefits I have had in the past as being the person who edited all of the shows before, in the earlier days, is therefore I listened to every single second and millisecond of every single show.
Oh, I know. I was getting feedbacks.
So I knew, which was a great form of feedback, right? I knew what we talked about and what we didn't talk about, and So I was tuned into it. You weren't. You come in. But I think that's also helps the dynamic. Frankly, I think it's good to have someone who just comes in and says whatever's on their minds, or doesn't say whatever's on their mind, and is divorced from it. I truly believe that. I think it's almost necessary.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I was also thinking, I think we had a post recently on like social media or something, and sometimes I go on there and like read comments, and it always amazes me in some way like how seriously people take things.
Yeah.
And I mean, you should be responsible in like the things you say if you put them out there, because it could hurt people, it could like bring the wrong message, it could like harm people eventually in some ways. So I think you have to be mindful of that. But also,
in the realm of architecture,
people are just too serious. Yeah. Like you say the smallest thing, and it's like, oh my God, you offended like dozens, and it's like, just chill. That's why I don't really think about the podcast, because otherwise I have to think about all of those people, and I'm like, I don't have space for you in my brain.
No, you don't. You don't. And I think one of the things about the show, too, that's been really fascinating is once we established a stronger social media presence through effort, intentional effort, and engaging in those communities to a degree and whatever else, you do get exposed to all these different people commenting or messaging and whatever else that now you have to you feel obligated to interact with. And it's weird. And, our show has had some level of success. Any longtime listeners or listeners kind of know this. And to be honest, I know this too, because when we go to certain events, people know who we are, which is totally weird. And that's not us bragging at all, but that's just
the fact. I always forget we have the podcast. I'm like, why is this person staring at me for the last half hour?
Yeah, I know.
And then they come over and they're like, how was your trip to France last summer? And I'm like, who the fuck are you?
Yeah. But that as an experience to go through is very specific and weird and different, and not an experience like any typical architect or any professional of any kind would have, right? That kind of interfacing with a body of people who you don't know but are part of your community through this platform of social media or messaging through the hotline or whatever. So we had Christine on the show, the building scientist on the show. Mm-hmm. And we were off air talking about that with her too. And she's experienced the same thing because she has a massive following, right? And I do have to say to the listeners, unless you've experienced that and you've created, you have a Instagram or a TikTok or a podcast or whatever things, you don't know what it's like. Although our show is micro compared to the realm of celebrities like you see on TV, I do now have, I feel, an inkling of what it's like for those people, not celebrities and fame. I'm talking about them having to deal with opinions of people they don't know about. They don't know, but opinions of them. I've gotten a taste of it, and it's fucking weird, and it's very easily quite annoying, and it can ruin your day. Distortion that takes place.
For anyone who's looking to start a podcast, it's something to think about. You know, it's
if you can't handle it,
as soon as you, and you know, as an architect, as soon as you put content out, any creative content, you know, it's going to get judged by people.
Sure.
One way or the other, right? People who are going to love it, it's going to be amazing feedbacks. It's going to be like really rich conversation. You're going to feel great. It's going to keep you like, you know, going and doing more of it. And then there is like the guy who's just trying to ruin your day. And it's the first thing you're going to see when you check your phone in the morning. And you have to kind of like learn to like not reply or not get affected by it. And then there's going to be more of that. So as someone who's looking to start anything that's creative and that's being shared, you kind of have to be prepared to deal with that. And there's not really like any way you can train yourself on how you're going to deal with it until you deal with it, to be honest, right?
It's weird.
And it also depends on like how aggressive, like people are pretty aggressive and people are sometimes even completely wrong. Like it would be amazed how many times you get like reaction on something we said and it's like they completely missed the point, or they like made up something that we did not say and just went on and on about it. And it's kind of like, I mean, in a way, it's a reality check of like the different palettes of people that populates this planet, and
asshole.
And you just kind of have to like, you know, just keep going and go past it, because there's no reason to engage with these people.
So the weird thing about social media, which I think we all know on some level, is that people say a bunch of stuff they would never say to you in person, of course, right? But it's also, what happens is anybody, I think it's human nature, even myself, I don't comment on stuff because it's pointless in my view. I don't comment on anything. Why would I comment on stuff? I don't need to comment on something. But my initial reaction, if I were to comment based on my initial reaction to something, is I look at whatever it is and I immediately think of it a specific thing that occurred to me that I can relate to, and then the post becomes about that. Even if the post was not about that. Yeah. Or the post was 10% about that, or 50% about that, or even 60, 70%. I still make the whole thing about that, and my comment is about my experience of the thing that I saw and what happened to me. Again, like even if the post is like it's not even really about that. It's like tangential. That's the way social media works. That's also why I think it, in some ways, is absolutely stupid and dumb. So my approach, the thing that I keep in mind is like this person and what they've said. If I was in person in front of them and they said that to me, would this be a person I would care about in their opinion? And oftentimes for the ones that just don't make sense, I'm like, no, then I'm not going to care about it. Right. Like, well, this is for another recording, but you know, I did conversations with a contractor who's like, well, I could do an architect's job. The problem with me having to engage with someone like that is that I have I don't know how many years of experience in architecture, beyond, probably even longer than that, but whatever years of experience in architecture. Now I have to take all my knowledge and my degrees, my 2 higher education levels of education, my experience in New York at all these offices, my experience now having an office, my experience doing all these projects and all and I have to somehow bring that to the table and educate this person about all that stuff. And I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do it because it's a waste of my time, right? At some point, when you become an expert, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but whoever is listening, when you become an expert at your thing, it's a waste of your time to engage with people who don't or aren't an expert, right? Why would a college-educated person on a subject matter of, I don't know, being a surgeon, right? Why would they argue with someone who's never been trained as a surgeon about the importance of how you cut or whatever, right? It's a waste of time. But to your point, this is exactly the type of thing that happens on social media, and it's a psychological like human innate like drug reaction to like I gotta respond, right?
And I think that's the challenge when you're starting, you know, let's say the podcast. It's like you don't have that community you built yet, so you feel obligated to reply to that comment because you don't want to let that comment tarnish, you know, the content you've posted, right? Once you've built that community, the community is going to be doing the work for you in replying to that specific person. And then conversations are going to happen and like people could debate among themselves and you just putting the content on the table and then you let people talk about it.
Yeah. There is definitely, I didn't think about this beforehand, but there is legitimately a dark side to producing anything that goes out there where someone can comment on it.
But I mean, it's not anything different than, you're creating a building and it's out on the street and people can drive by and throw tomatoes at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I'm not there to see the tomatoes.
Yeah, but you might hear about it in the town that nobody likes your building. You know what I mean? Like, I think at some point you have to, like, if you have a stronger belief than the opinion that people are giving to you about what they think of what you're doing, then just keep going.
I'd also say that this form of criticism, if you can even call it that, is very different from what you experience in architecture school or as an architect with clients. Well, let's say architecture school. In architecture school, you get a lot of critical feedback, sometimes very harsh, but it's for the most part,
from your peers.
Peers and professionals who, they might say stupid shit, but they're still like highly trained individuals, right? So you have the ability to say to yourself, well, there's maybe something there, even though what they said is batshit crazy, but let me think about it, because they do have legit experience. On social media, I have no idea who's commenting or what they've done. And quite often, to be honest, if I dig deeper, I'm like, yeah, you're nobody. You went to like some shit school, you have no experience, or you didn't go to school at all, and you build houses that look like crap. So why? I'm not going to talk to you. Right? You're the person who I despise, who builds shitty things, and you don't understand design. Why would I engage with you? Right? But I would, because that's the human side of everybody, right? To want to engage.
So office and podcast balance is to make sure that it doesn't make your life any worse than it was before you started.
Yeah. At the same time, though, right? The danger of just saying your thing and not listening to anybody ever is that you can end up getting lost in your own thoughts, and you don't keep yourself in check because you're not allowing other people to help you keep yourself in check.
Yeah, and I think also when you're publishing content, it is to engage with people. It's not just to like monologue about what your beliefs are. Otherwise, you're just preaching.
Depends on who you ask, though.
No, but I mean, I think some sort of healthy conversation is good. It's just kind of like the PC comments. It's like, this is not. You're not bringing a conversation to the table. You're just bringing your problem to the table.
The good thing for us, too, is that we've produced so many episodes now and so many hours of content that if I say something on one episode, or I have an entire episode where I'm pitching one perspective, right? And people hate that perspective, I care less, because I know over the course of, what are we at? 400? Is that right?
Yeah, 400 something.
400 something episodes. And then whatever number of episodes we do next, that's one out of many. And I might change my mind. So what? That's also, to me, the point of the podcast is it's a kind of catalog, archive, diary, I suppose, of ideas and thoughts. There's plenty of things I've said in the past where I disagree with them now. It, again, is the difference between the producer and the consumer, the buyer and the seller, right? Buyers are entitled little babies. Sellers don't behave that way. It's like anyone who's had to work as a waiter at a restaurant, right? The chances of them
work as a waiter?
The chances of them being a good patron are much higher, right? Because they know what the waiter's going through. It's the same kind of thing, right? I don't. That's why I don't leave.
Giving them shit just because they need revenge.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's twisted people out there.
Sure. So anyway, so that's all that. But on the subject of balancing, thoughts?
I think also in terms of balancing, if you we didn't really have a plan per se. We're just gonna start and see where this takes us, right? And eventually we figured it out. But like, you don't necessarily have to have a plan at the beginning. But I think at some point, once in a while, you have to check in with yourself and see if it's worthwhile to keep going, and where are you trying to go? Because it does require a lot of time to do anything that's kind of like secondary to what your main thing is.
Yeah.
Because it does takes a little bit of focus out of the main thing you're doing, and it does take a little bit of time out of the rest of your time, right?
Sure.
So, of course, you can keep doing things for fun and like never really think about it. But if it's a regular pattern, I think you kind of have to like check in with yourself once in a while and see like, okay, what have I done? What am I trying to do?
Right.
Is this thing worth it?
Right.
Like, should I keep going? Should I pivot? Should I, do something else?
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean like you have to have like the ideal business plan or you have to have all the answers. But I think it is a healthy habit to just kind of like assess and reassess things before you keep going.
Yeah.
And we've done that several times.
Yeah. We yes, we have done that several times. So the time away is true. Like, mathematically, it's time out of the day to do this other thing. The thing that's been interesting about the show is that as a business owner and as an architect, right, it's very easy to be consumed by the work and be kind of stuck in that vision of the work, right? And an architect's vision is quite wide, but it's still like the work. And I found that the show actually is a great benefit for us because it forces us to kind of step outside at least for a couple hours once a week, which is not a whole lot of time, to like be in this other secondary space, to think about things from a slight distance and with someone else if there's a guest. And that is a great benefit. I think otherwise it's very easy to just be in your, to be spinning in the same place, architecture office-wise, and not being like, oh, this is an interesting idea that we came across because we're inside of a different physical space, the two of us, or because we've talked with someone else and, they said something interesting that makes me think about a project in a different way or think about business in a different way or whatever else. So I think it's actually proven quite healthy because when you are a small business, it's like your whole life is that thing, and it's a nice healthy forced break sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's also a healthy thing in order to socialize. If you have your own business, like you're probably really busy just running that beast, 5 days a week and make it work, right? And the weekend comes, you probably want to be a couch potato, watch Netflix, and not go out and meet anyone. So that's where the podcast is kind of a nice thing, because depending on how you look at it, you could kind of make it work both ways. You can make it work toward like things that are related to your main focus, like your profession, and you can also make it work toward like social life.
And
right?
meeting
which
people.
Is like your personal thing.
And meeting new people, yeah.
So it is, in that sense, it's pretty interesting. And depending on what focus your podcast is about, it also kind of keeps you engaged with the current scene of things, the current scene of events. Right?
Interesting.
Like when I used to work at offices, I would like scroll, Arc Daily and like all of the architecture blogs to kind of know like what's going on, like what's the latest things, topics, or like things that people are talking about, the problem in the professions and this and that. Now that we have conversation with guests on, or even just the two of us, we kind of get to dab into these things and stay connected to other people in our profession without having to like go to a zillion places and meet a ton of people.
I mean, really, I think the reason why the podcast, where it comes from in a way, is that architectural discourse is a big part of architecture. And I think for non-architects, they don't know this. But in the academic space, and then even in the profession to a degree, the discourse, the discussion, the talking and the thinking and the conceptual aspects and the history is a huge part of architecture. There's a lot to talk about, obviously, with the podcast, but even in school, right? And I think for myself, I always really enjoyed those parts of school a lot. Like seminars were some of my favorite classes. Being in a room with like a small group of 15 students, you read a bunch of papers and you talk about stuff. Like I've fucking loved it. When you get to the profession, it some of that goes away. Depending at the office, maybe all of it goes away. And when you have your own business, man, the number of things you have to think about multiplies by 10. And so finding a space for that kind of discourse, whether it be about the theory of architecture, or the business or the practice or whatever else, right? It becomes, for me at least, it's like almost like necessary. Like I when we were in New York working at other offices, we had all of our friends were architects, of course. And there was a small group of us, and one of the close friends had this idea, the two of them had this idea of starting a little architecture discourse group, and we would read stuff and get together once a month or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
And we would have bring snacks and beers and whatever, and we would talk about what we read. And these were a pretty talented group of people, yes, but also like pretty normative architects in New York. Like these were not all like academic nerds. Like these were pretty like normal architects. It goes to show you that within that community of normal architects, there was a thirst and a hunger for like, let's talk about like some cool stuff. Like we don't get to talk about that anymore. We don't get to talk about whatever, right? And that group kind of fizzled out for various reasons. That's just another example, right? For myself, at least, like, well, the podcast kind of satisfies that thirst for that. And I actually wish we could talk about more architectural, theory things. But as time goes on, and the more distant I become from academia, it's harder for me to engage in the conversations, find those people, or like care some days. To be honest, like there's other problems that the profession faces.
I think once you start like having your own practice, your own clients, your own projects, like the reality is just taking too much of your brain space. That
for me, it's not that. For me, the reality is that what we really need to be talking about is how the profession is suffering. How can it do better, and how can we communicate to non-architects? And if this is not related to the content of this episode, but like, let's be real, and I've thought about this as a standalone episode, like what is the biggest problem facing architecture today? The biggest problem, like the profession of architecture. It's the fact that no one outside of architects understands or cares or values what we do. That's the biggest problem. And it's not just a problem for the profession and its self-preservation. It's a problem for like the world, because architects, I fundamentally believe, do have a lot of value to provide in terms of beauty, design, sustainability, all that stuff, right? And if people don't understand that, that's like a massive problem. And so once that became clear to me that is the subject, that's my focus for the next like 50 years until it gets solved. The theory of like blobs versus NURBS and splurbs and square corners, cool, I get it. It's certainly valuable. It's seeds for design. To be honest, that's easy relative to the bigger question, relative to the question of what I just posed.
Well, which is more about survival of the profession,
Survival and also flourishing. It's something that's not thought about and not interrogated in the rigorous manner that when as compared to the subject of blobitecture, fuck man, how many papers and articles and research papers were done on blobitecture? Yet the biggest question we all face, who's actually really thinking about it in that hypercritical, peer-reviewed manner? It's not happening, right? Anyway, this is a different conversation now, but so for me, once that went off, it's hard for me to really care so deeply about other things. Because if we can't solve the question of communication to the public, what difference does it make if we understand the nuances of what creates good physical architecture? What good is that if no one understands it, right? Or no one wants to hire an architect? Not much. So you can play in your sandbox as a research architect doing parametric or whatever the new thing is these days. Again, it's a great recipe, but if you can't sell to anybody and no one wants to buy it and no one cares, does a tree make a sound when it falls in the woods? Like what are we doing here?
Yeah, happy thoughts.
So anyway, so there's that. So what is your,
other thoughts about, I guess, work-life balance or whatever is the subject?
Yeah. So the podcast has become much more organized, over the years, and it's been a slow progression. Right?
Yes,
it doesn't happen overnight.
Yes, and we talked about like kind of like creating like habits or schedule on when do you record, like what how much time you allocate to that thing. I think the other thing that was key for us very early on is to create systems. Systems and everything, like the studio, like we have like certain things that are always there, like when we set up, like that's the setup, right? When we I just what I was trying to say.
Yeah,
when we have like files, like electronic files, we have like specific folders and things are organized in a very specific way. Again, systems, just so like you just have to be organized. That's kind of the key to anything.
Yeah,
right?
it's almost like...
And it makes your life easier because then you don't have to think about all of those things when time comes. So creating systems from the beginning, just thinking about the boring stuff, like, I don't know, photo structure, how do you name stuff, like graphics, just establish that, website, get that sorted out, like what's your setup, it's always the same. You nail it once and you repeat it and that's it.
Yeah.
And then it just gives you the focus on just the content and you don't have to worry about any of that logistical stuff.
It's almost like you need to conquer the basics before you can do anything else. It's true though.
It's nothing revolutionary.
No, it's not.
It does work.
But it's like, it's one of those things that it's critical, and it is true. Like, if you don't have that, then you don't have. You're trying to. It seems counterintuitive that you would create, hardcore structure to have freedom, but you need to have that structure to have freedom, especially now. I think 30 years ago, whatever, man, doesn't matter. But now we have so much stuff to deal with technology-wise, and the industry is everything's more complex. To be successful, you could be the one in a million, but if you don't want to make that bet, then to be successful, you have to have those hyper-structured systems and organizations in place in order for the creativity to be there, and the questioning of those systems. Otherwise...
But it's nothing different in the end than like, the work that we do as architects. Like, you have your preferred pens and papers, you have your notebook, you have the software that you have like your specific workflow. When you start a project, like you always kind of like start looking at it in a similar way or whatever. Like, you have to establish what is your process, what are your tools, then you can create.
And at some point, you have the space to then question those tools. So like, for the podcast, it was because we've also always been very mindful of how much time to put into the show before it occupies too much space so that it's damaging other things, right? And so therefore the evolution and advancement of the systems, or the podcast in general, has taken place over a longer period of time. Because it's not a full-time job. If it's a full-time job, then things might have advanced quicker. But also at key points, like you said earlier, then there's a time to kind of reflect and then look back on the past 6 months, year, 2 year, whatever it is, and then question, do we need to change things physically around us or whatever it is to then get to the next part or keep things interesting for ourselves. The funny thing is, so... sometimes people reach out to us and they think that the podcast is like our full-time job, or they think that like, oh, do you have an office like on the side? Like, do you have something else going on in addition to the podcast? And it's the opposite. We have an office, and in addition to the office, we have a podcast, right? And maybe it surprises people apparently that the office is like 99% of the time and effort. The podcast is the 5 or 1%. That doesn't mean we don't care about the podcast. It doesn't mean we don't put good amount of time thinking about it and work into it. It means we are structured a certain way. I also truly believe, one could say as a criticism of that, well, you should put more time into the show so the show can evolve and blah, 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 right? We've done this long enough to where I truly believe, though, that if we were to cross that threshold of putting more time into the podcast, wherever that threshold is, it would actually be a disservice to the podcast. Because the reason why the show is because we do have an office and we are architects and we are practicing. That shapes the show, because we're obviously, we are the show, right? We're not just the hosts, like we are the show. And that's a fundamental difference. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we oftentimes get people asking us like, well, how many hours a week do you spend on the podcast? Or they come up with ideas like, oh, you should do this. Oh, this podcast, they've done that. Yeah, but those guys, that's all they do 100% of their time. That is the podcast is their life, is their focus. And the thing is, it's not that for us. And we're not trying to become a media company or do all of that stuff, like do more of it. I think we want to keep doing what we're doing.
You should read my notebook, because I have some other things written down that
But I don't think that I want to spend 50%, 100% of my time doing the podcast. Like I'm not interested in that, know.
No.
Then you're right. Then I would have nothing to talk about it during those episodes because I would not be doing architecture.
We struggle already with finding things to talk about.
Why you struggle?
No, I mean, like we are architects and we do architecture. That's what we do. That's what we studied to do. That's what we train to do through working in offices, and that's what we do now. That is the goal. The podcast is a, I don't know what it is. It's a weird. It's almost like an important like skin in some way. Like it's this intermediary between the office and then everyone else. And I feel, I don't have a rational thought behind this, but I feel like it's important for that reason, right? And maybe it goes back to the initial impetus for starting the show of feeling that architecture sometimes is this thing behind a black curtain that is not understood, and now we need this vehicle to allow it to kind of transpire or go through to get out there. So I don't know. The two, that again, that's why it's the second. They have this weird kind of symbiotic relationship that, in my view, is very well defined, and not letting one overtake the other. And the same thing goes for the office too, right? The office cannot. We can't allow the office to get so out of control and become disorganized to where we can't set aside at least a handful of hours a week to the podcast. I mean, in my view, if you can't set aside that amount of time per week for something like this, then it's not because you are so dedicated to the office. It's because you're not organized. That's what it means, I think.
Yeah, or maybe you're not the one doing all of it. I'm gonna have to work after this podcast.
Yeah. So I do want to answer. So, like, someone reached out. I think it was on YouTube, and they said that they're an architect in some, I think, other country, and they are starting a podcast. They want to start a podcast or doing social media or something.
Yeah.
And they were asking, like, how does that work?
I think, like, again, you discipline, you set up your system, but then also the main thing, honestly, is to be committed. Like, how many times have we met people who are like, oh, I was thinking of starting a podcast. And it's like, that's cool. Did you start? Like, how many did you do? Like, are you going to keep doing it?
I did 5, and then I don't know.
It takes so much time. It's so much this. Okay, well, if it's so painful, then don't keep going. Like, don't do it. Like, I think you have to be interested, you have to be committed in order to take it anywhere.
Yeah.
And also you can't expect 5 episodes to get you anywhere. Like,
no, you can't even expect 100 episodes to get you anywhere. You just keep going. But that's also what I was saying earlier. Like, it's almost like if you allow the goal of achieving wild success with it be the goal and the motivation, that you're not going to succeed. The motivation has to be the joy of doing it. And fortunately for me, at least, I enjoy doing it. And the same thing with architecture to a degree, or anything else, right? The pursuit of happiness of whatever you're doing is not necessarily the end product, right? The happiness is the doing of it. I mean, I say that like, oh, some days architecture is really tough, but that's the thing, right? So if especially with something like social media or podcasting, you just have to enjoy doing it, and because you like doing it, and just keep doing it. I think, you were kind of describing that you're critical or perhaps slightly irked by people who say they're going to do stuff and they either don't do it or they do it for like a week and they stop. The same exact feeling, I believe, is felt by professors in schools who are very well-known established professors who have students come up and say like, professor, I'm so interested in this thing. I'm going to go and do that thing and become successful and whatever. Professor's like, okay, fucking do it then. And then a week later, oh no, they're not doing it. And countless times,
or like they present a project at a final crit and they're like, oh, my project really was going to be about this. Yeah, but you didn't do it. So it's not about this.
Like when I had Michael Sorkin as a teacher, and I think I might have said this on here before as well. It's very interesting because Michael Sorkin is Michael Sorkin, right? And it's very easy. It's very common for students and everyone else to put him on a pedestal because that's Michael Sorkin. And I would see him, and I would see students come up to him and say, Professor Sorkin, I'm going to do this thing, or whatever it is. I'm interested in this topic. I'm going to write a paper, whatever. And first of all, he's one of the few people I've met who I really, like the smartest person. You know, he's in that category of like his stratosphere is above everyone else. It also seen so many students that I could tell he could tell within the first 5 seconds, maybe even less, whether or not this student was actually really serious and they were going to do it. He could see it in his eyes, right? Because his eyes would look different. They would be kind of like gray looking if he sensed that this person is not really serious. And his eyes would light up a bit if it was a person who felt like they were actually going to do something. And he could tell like that. And I don't know what I was saying with that, but it's the same thing. Like, I feel like when I talk to people who want to do a podcast or students who want to become this and that, I'm like, yeah, I can tell though whether or not you're serious about it and whether or not you're just saying it because, I don't know, you feel like it's the thing to say. It's remarkably obvious. I'll say that for like anyone younger, it's like really, really obvious. The best way I can describe it physically that someone might experience is that when you're in a classroom, a normal classroom setting, right? And you have a room of like 30 students and you have a teacher at the front, right? When you're a student amongst the 30 other students, do you think that whatever you're doing at your desk, you're writing notes or on your phone, the teacher can't see it? You have that feeling. When you're at the front of the class, you see everything and everybody and what they're doing. It's that kind of difference in vision between those two things. And it's the same thing when people say that they want to do a podcast or they aspire to do something versus being the person who has done it for a period of time now and you're talking to them. And unfortunately, most people, they say they're going to do something and they don't actually do it. It's not very common for them to see it through.
You somehow always manage to bring everything back to school.
Well, I did teach architecture. I do have an interest in teaching.
I think we should send you to a therapist and kind of unpack that. I think there's something with school that's following you around. I mean, how many more years are you going to keep talking about school? Like, at what point is school gone?
It's never going to be gone.
Like,
because I if I wasn't doing this, I would probably teach. And I do think that architecture school specifically, is probably one of the most profound experience any architect goes through.
No, it was. I mean, I had an amazing time in school, and I love learning, and I still love learning, and I would still love going to school if I could afford it. You know what I mean? But at some point, it has to end.
It's never gonna end. No, well, start your own podcast then. What the fuck?
I'm gonna start a podcast against David talking about school.
Anything else about behind the scenes, making the show? I don't know, balancing.
I think people also think that we do a lot more preparation than we actually do. I mean, we do our.
You do.
Do what?
You said we, in the preparation. That we do more preparation. The show. We. Oh, okay. Okay.
I think people probably think that we have like so many questions. We do so much reading and research and all of that. No, we don't. And that's also probably what makes the show is that we're not, trying to like check facts and like ask, very precise questions. It's a conversation and let's see where it takes us. That's kind of the vibe of what the second studio is about.
That's your vibe on your side of the desk. I have to think about stuff. I'm always
the one doing research. You don't do research.
I have to think about stuff, and I write outlines and things.
Okay, about guests.
Nah, guests, they're people. You just. What's your favorite donut? Cream filled, huh? No, but What's that about?
Yeah, right. Anyway.
No. It is true. There's a sort of lightness that we try to bring to the approach to the conversations with guests.
And I have to say, actually, the best episodes to me are the ones that are not scripted, not prepped. Like we have some episodes where we do have to have, some bullet points, like some guidelines of conversation, just to make sure we do cover the subject and listeners feel satisfied with the content they've just listened to and can actually like summarize it in their heads, right? versus just rambling on for an hour and a half. But I actually don't like doing those episodes, I have to say, because
the rambling or the
because it has to feel
the
flowy and natural. No, the ones that are more like bullet points. Like,
gotcha. Yeah.
Because I feel like it's not who I am. It's very hard to keep track of the bullet points without reading the bullet points and like, you know, keeping things, not talking about the stuff that's coming later, not talking about it now. Like it's just not enjoyable. I'd rather write a blog so I could expand on the bullet points in writing and in the order that makes sense, rather than trying to be like a spoken blog where I have to like manage all that stuff.
A splog.
Like,
yeah.
A splog. You just made that up?
Yeah.
Wow, we just launched a new trend, the splog.
A splog. Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. And the episodes that are more pre-planned are definitely much more challenging. Because there's pressure too.
It's a different type of content.
It's a different type of content.
It's a totally different type of content, which, you know, I mean, for some people it might be the way they like to do things, and I don't know. For me, those episodes are not the ones I enjoy the most.
Well, so the other thing too is when folks trying to start podcasting, whatever, and they're trying to structure it and understand what it's going to be before it takes place, like you were kind of talking about earlier. We have always, and now it always had a mixture of different types of conversations, right? And now it is more structured in that we know before we record an episode what type of content it's going to be, whether it's completely casual, it's geared toward the architecture and design community, geared toward folks who don't know anything about architecture and design, or it's an interview or it's a review, or like now we know. But having that diversity is also something, from what I've seen at least, that is not as common, right? And the normal approach to any business, let's call it, that you're embarking on is to kind of like pick one lane and then pick a lane within that lane and pick another lane within that lane until you're like 1 millimeter focused, and then that's your laser beam and that's what you do and that's it. We've not really taken that approach And I think that's also not very normal. I don't necessarily advise it as well. And it makes it easier for us to do that now because we have so many episodes, right? It's hard to do that when you're first starting because it creates confusion amongst the listeners and confusion for the show. It's like, what is this? What? You're talking about school and school presentations. Now you're talking about construction stuff, and now you're talking about Trader Joe's refried beans. But what is this? What?
I think also it depends, like, what is the big umbrella about? I mean, architecture is such a big field. There's so many things that fall under. Like, school is a huge part of it, work is a huge part of it, construction is a huge part of it. Like, you could easily kind of like have like secondary umbrellas under it.
No, I know, of course, right? But what I'm saying is, like, when you, if one were to start a podcast about X topic, it would probably be much more focused than what we do.
Yeah, but also if you're so focused, like at some point you just run out of stuff to talk about. You know what I mean? Like if you only talk about socks, like your podcast is about socks.
Don't underestimate the...
No, but you know, like, okay, at what point are you just stretching yourself a bit too thin to stay on the topic of what you started with? Like,
I suppose. I don't know.
And also, I don't know. I don't like restrictions. You know, people are like, oh, you should be doing this. You should only be talking about that. It's like, well, why? Like, our brains are so much more complex than just that one thing. Like, if people can't think about me as like these three things, then that's not the people I'm trying to attract. You know, that's it. Like, I think there is also too much emphasis on like
what,
like market.
Right.
If you only sell blue, you know, cups, then you will be the person people go to buy blue cups.
Corner the market of blue cups.
Like, okay, but also like, how big is my blue cup market? You know what I mean? Like, maybe I want to appeal to like all of the color cups market. Like,
it's about the appealing of the market, but it's also like, what, do I want to be blue cup person?
Does that excite me to sell only blue cups?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I also believe, and this is also the reason why our show is quote structured the way it is the thinking that's applied to, let's say, designing a building, at some level is the same tenor of thinking that's applied to everything else. I don't see a distinction, really. And I think that, to me, I believe that to be true, and I think the podcast has been an interesting exploration of that idea, right? Like, so when I complain, as I often do on here, about miscellaneous things in life, I don't think that the point of rationale for that is that much different from the thinking applied to designing. It's coming from the same place, right? It's from the same person, yes, but I think it's coming from the same place, and I think that I just don't, like I was saying in the after hours of that, I don't see a distinction between like daytime and nighttime life. It's not severance, right? It's the same kind of understanding of things, the same openness, the same opinion, the same. I think that's also the fascinating thing, to then understand the guests we have on and be like, okay, well, tell us about some somewhat random thing, and how does that relate, not directly, but how does that thinking and the way of speaking and your thought process, how does that relate to your work? I think that's very fascinating. Anyway, I think that's it for this. Let's eat dinner. It's like super late. Anything else? Give us one last words of wisdom, then we'll wrap this up. Give us something really good to close on.
Make sure you plan for vacations.
See, that's a classic Marina right there, saying some weird stuff at the very end.
It's not weird. It's healthy, David.
Okay.
If you think it's weird, that means you don't believe it's healthy.
Give us an outro.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to our shenanigans. If you like what we do, please subscribe to the show. We are on Apple Podcasts,
I like how the
YouTube.
outro immediately, you're speaking up here, excitement.
Because it's the
outro.
end.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the show. Leave us a review. Go on vacation, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. Leave a review if you want to.
I thought I was pretty peppy in my outro here. You just killed my mojo, man.
It went down.
Hey, I'm tired.
Okay.
I slept 6 hours last night.
Just go further down.
Good night. No, if you like what we do, please subscribe to the show, share it, pass it around. You can find us on social media, Second Studio Pod. We have the website, secondstudiopod.com. We have the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can shoot a text message, call, leave a voicemail. If you have any questions, any guest suggestions, any feedbacks, if they're good, because I'm not interested in bad feedbacks, honestly.
No. We want all the feedbacks. Keep yourselves in check.
Just don't be mean.
You don't read them anyway.
That's true.
On the hotline. So what the hell is this?
I'm trying to preserve you, because then I have to deal with you if you're upset. So please don't upset him, because then you're upsetting me.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's it. We have a lot more content coming up. This is just almost the half of 2025. This is nuts. All right. Mm-hmm. So stay tuned. Talk soon.
Oh, okay. That's a great outro. Love it. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.